Our three witnesses, Lord Sumption, Professor Russell and Lord Desvain, from our first panel. Thank you very much indeed for a contribution this morning. And now, by means of this modern technology, we have our second panel, who I'm pleased to welcome, to our former colleague Graham Allen, and also to Dr. Andrew Blick. And if I could hand over, please, to Jackie Doyle-Price.
Thank you, Chairman. My question to Graham Allen, welcome. Your proposals for a citizens' convention predates the government's commitment for a commission. Can you tell us what concerns with the UK's constitutional arrangements and democracy led you to develop these proposals?
I think our proposals, unlike the licence that was happily afforded to the previous witnesses, are very tight and very discreet. It's about how we get citizens' engagement in any process. And obviously this process has now come through the manifesto process of the government, but also it's referred to in the manifestos of the other three UK-wide parties in their manifestos to a degree. So there's a desire for a review of democracy among the political parties. So we've adjusted our offer, if you like, which we've put to government actually today. We've sent our proposal through to the Prime Minister and to Michael Gove, which is to the government, and it's about how citizens themselves can get engaged in the Commission. It is not about the Commission, it is not about the agenda of the Commission, it is, in a sense, process rather than policies. I think we've all got a view on policies. We could all talk forever about our favourite policies in these areas, but very few people talk about the process. So we've created a process which is beginning with citizens, as anything to do with our democracy should do. Those citizens, and we can explain about their selection and how they're facilitated and how they put their things forward, but they present their views as a gift to the Commission. Then it is entirely up to the Commission what it wishes to do with those views, and then next in the production line up to Parliament and government. No one is telling anybody what to do, but what we've designed, we hope, is a means by which, a process by which citizens can be involved. And that, Jackie, is actually quite new, because deliberative democracy is quite fledgling. It has been around some time, but really the critical mass has developed globally in the last couple of years, where we now do have ways of engaging with people, getting proper selection, getting microcosms of a nation, for example, which we couldn't do 2 or 3 years ago. We can do that now, and there's great experience out there that we've tapped into. So deliberative democracy, if you like, is the next iteration of democracy. If democracy is going to go forward rather than fall backwards, how do we engage citizens? And we hope that our proposal, which is not to sort of take it or leave it, it's an opening bid to engage government and say, have a look at this, what do you think, how can we improve on it? And finally, the reason to do that, I think now, is because in order for the Commission to work, everyone has got to work together on this. We've heard that this morning. There are lots of ways of putting it, but I like to call it a four-legged chair of the Commission, just one of those legs. Parliament is another leg, government is another leg, and the final leg, without which the chair falls flat on the ground, and us with it, is getting the citizens meaningfully engaged. We're not saying that this thing is the be-all and end-all, but we hope to start that conversation and make that a reality so we can improve and maintain our democracy.
Thank you. I mean, at the risk of putting words into your mouth, it kind of feels like we're in essentially the development of democracy has been top down, with gradually giving more and more to the citizens. And implicit in what you said is that we now have tools to engage citizens better. Is that a fair characterisation?
I think so, and I think we, in the modern era, I think we should strive to make our democracy better. I think for 100 years we all worked away, no doubt, at trying to extend the franchise. How do we
Yeah.
improve democracy? We haven't now got a steady state democracy. We'll either improve or slip back. What's the next level? What's the next stage? And I think that is not to do yes or no, black or white with the citizens, a sort of enormous opinion poll. It is to engage citizens so that they can make a genuine contribution. And I have to say, I started as a skeptic about this. My view was, were citizens able to do this? It's a very complicated and difficult arrangement, isn't it? Shouldn't we leave that to just other people, maybe members of parliament only? But then, as a former member of parliament for 30 years, it was often very difficult to make any impact at all when bills were landed on us, as they still are, by the government. So getting that engagement and finding the processes to do it, I think has been a really big breakthrough. And I think it's essential. If there's a commission on the Constitution and democracy and rights, citizens have to be involved meaningfully in some way. So yes, Jackie, is the answer to your question.
Yeah, and I mean, in terms of getting the citizens, citizen engagement, is this really a failure of political parties? Because there was a time when political parties were mass membership organisations. They're not now. Let's be brutally frank about it. The Labour Party was a creature of the trade union movement, which was mass participation, and the Conservative Party used to have, membership running into millions. I think where they're both looking to get hundreds of thousands now. And is that one of the reasons why perhaps the citizens are disengaged from their political class?
I don't blame the political parties, because I think they were a product of their time. But what I would blame political parties would be if they refused to go with the times, use new technology in a nuanced way, not a yes-no sort of way, and engage people, which is now on offer, which even when I was a member 3 years ago, it seems a lot longer, we didn't really understand what deliberation was like. We didn't see it, and Andrew and myself will explain that if necessary as we go on. So I think we just need to catch up, and we need to ensure that people feel that they own their democracy, not that they tell people what to do and it has to happen just so, but that you engage in a proper debate. I think when that happens, people feel a part of it, even if, for example, in a jury is a sort of metaphor very often for deliberation, that people can engage in discussion, they can hear expert witnesses, they take their time, they do democracy in good conditions, which, to be honest, we never did in the House of Commons in my 30 years, I have to say, to actually listen carefully, come back again a week later, discuss things. That, I think, is a really good thing. And what it does for political parties, particularly parliamentary parties, is it strengthens parliamentary parties, because Parliament becomes an institution which is often the commissioner of a citizens' convention, as your colleagues in the Select Committee on Housing and Local Government have done a superb report using deliberative democracy on social care, and 6 of your fellow select committees have commissioned a report on climate change, which has produced a superb report. We can have questions perhaps later about whether that then translates into action, and I think translating it into action is something we shouldn't leave behind. The deliberation isn't the be-all and end-all, it is the beginning of the process. But I think political parties are moving with the times, Parliament is moving with the times, select committees certainly are moving with the times, and it would be good if the Commission on the Constitution, Democracy and Rights moved with the times also, and enabled people to express their view in a meaningful way, which wasn't a command, but was a gift to enable rational discussion later on up the food chain.
Thank you. Just a quick final point. I mean, one of the simple ways that some political figures choose to go in terms of, involving the public is, let's put it to a referendum. And, referendums become an unnecessarily binary choice, frankly, and isn't the best way of making decisions. I mean, would you? What would be your view of that if ultimately we had a system where the Commission would come up with proposals which were then put in that kind of engagement?
I think the Commission is entitled to say how proposals should be put. But if you're asking me as someone who's with the Citizens Convention on UK democracy, trying to engage citizens in a meaningful, nuanced and sophisticated way, then clubbing issues with a yes or no hammer, I don't think is the way to go, because it doesn't engage a lot of people sensibly. It doesn't allow people to listen to both sides. It doesn't allow them to think and discuss in small groups and come to conclusions. It doesn't allow them to say, that sounds good, but can you also add this issue as well? Have you thought about that? And throughout the planet, there are literally now hundreds of deliberations going on. And what they do, surprisingly perhaps, is they come up with answers that often allow politicians to take the compromise forward. And the best example of that is in Ireland on abortion, where Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael would never even raise that issue publicly. But enabling citizens to talk about it enabled us as politicians, as it were, to say, it looks to us as though they've come up with something pretty sensible here that we could never have done. We would have been whipped in a particular way. We would have been hit by the media for what we were saying. But a group of citizens representative of the microcosm, which in that case was Ireland, came up with sensible proposals, and they have now found resonance not only in the Dáil, but also through a referendum as well. So doing it in a steady, slow-cooked politics rather than macked politics, if you like, way, enables a more sensible answer, which can actually do what we're trying to do now, aren't we, in getting the whole of the country back together again and working together and healing some of the wounds. And I think deliberative democracy and this specific citizens' convention to feed into the Commission is a good way to do that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And if I take the next question, and Graham and Andrew, please do feel free to answer in whichever order. So convince me. I'm a fuddy-duddy on all of this. Here I am in the grand surroundings of Committee Room 6, perhaps under the misapprehension that Parliament was somehow a sort of citizens' assembly of sorts. So how are you going to convince the likes of me that this proposal isn't in conflict with our parliamentary democracy? How are you going to convince me?
Andrew, do you want to go first?
Why not? I'll do my best to convince you then. If that doesn't work, I'm sure we'll continue the task. I think, as Graham suggested in his previous answer, these mechanisms are not intended as an alternative or a way of supplanting representative democracy. They're actually intended to be supportive of it. So I think my personal view on this is, in many ways, the best body to commission this would be Parliament itself. And we've seen already that select committees have been doing that. So clearly they do not regard it as a challenge. They regard it as a supportive mechanism that actually enhances the capacity of Parliament to be a representative of the people. And that's the way I would clearly look at it. And we did actually hear reference from Professor Russell's very interesting evidence earlier to a line in the Conservative manifesto that described MPs as, and the exact wording is, having devoted themselves to thwarting the democratic decision of the British people. So I'm afraid this idea is already there, that somehow there's a conflict between Parliament and the democratic will of the people. And I think actually this is a more sophisticated way of incorporating the people into a decision-making process in a way that's supportive of Parliament, rather than creates this idea that unfortunately we've had over the last few years, that in some way the people are in conflict with Parliament. So actually this is a way of bringing people back from that situation, bringing Parliament back together with the people, and then also working with government. Because if Parliament and government and the people are all supposedly in conflict with each other, that seems to be a recipe for a very divisive situation. So that's how I would seek to persuade you.
Thank you. And Graham's
if I
turn
may,
to persuade.
If I may briefly, Chair, not forgetting that I was a fuddy-duddy in your chair for 5 years, and although we did many things on democratic reform and the constitutional reform, we never got around to do an effective look at deliberation. And that was because at that time, it had not impinged upon the consciousness of members of Parliament in the way that it has now, with Scotland, Wales, English regions, other countries doing as examples of deliberation. Jim Fishkin in America, 110 different deliberations globally. Her Majesty's government supporting the Innovations in Democracy programme and doing 3 local examples to show how this can work in specific places in Dudley, Cambridge and Test Valley. So things have moved on, and I hope I'm be forgiven for being a fuddy-duddy in those days, but having caught up a little bit now. But more seriously, I think the key thing here is not that it erodes, as Andrew said, it doesn't erode Parliament. On the contrary, it will allow Parliament to spread its wings and members of Parliament to do the job that they often thought they were elected to do on the back of really good pre-legislative discussion that can take place. And I was one of the inventors of pre-legislative scrutiny, because scrutiny wasn't good enough on bills, and it's still not good enough. Imagine if, and this is a stretch, but imagine if bills were discussed instead of lying on the table for 6 weeks. Let them have a public debate, perhaps properly organised deliberative democracy debate, to inform the bill before second reading. There are lots of possibilities where, if members of Parliament want to grab these opportunities, it needn't be done and commissioned by government. It can be commissioned by Parliament indeed, and produce even better legislation which MPs feel that they own, rather than they're just part of the sausage machine saying yes or no in a very unhelpful way and not facilitating genuine debate.
Thank you. And if I
Are
could
you
get...
convinced, Chair? Are you convinced?
Well, I may yet be redeemed. We'll have to wait and see. I will keep considering it. And if I could go on that note to Lloyd Russell Moyle, please.
I just want to kind of. I mean, I'm generally a supporter of the idea, but I wonder if the abortion example that you gave, Graham, a social issue that was around bringing people together on social things that affect them in their day-to-day lives. And Andrew, the argument that you say about it seeming like Parliament versus the people, well, the reality is the people were divided, Parliament was divided. Parliament probably was representing the people better than it's done in generations, in the sense that the country was asunder and so was Parliament. So are we trying to use a method here in terms of citizens' kind of deliberation that is trying to resolve something that actually has now gone in the past Brexit, and a method that was better used on social issues, not on constitutional issues?
Shall I go?
Yeah, go ahead, Andrew. I'll come later.
Yeah.
On the Parliament versus people, I agree. I think that was the problem, that the public were divided, and in fact remain divided. And yeah, that the reference in the manifesto there was actually from a party which was on the leadership of which, not necessarily all the members of which, but the leadership of which were on one side of that debate, and that's the problem. But I think if the government we've got now want, with their proposal, to actually move beyond that division, which is still there, this is the kind of thing they would be advised to look at. But if the exercise they're doing is actually going to be a continuation of that division, taking a particular side in that argument and continuing to pursue it, then we are going to carry on having divisions around those fundamental issues. So this is a way of moving beyond those divisions. And I think those divisions are still there. We have left the European Union, but the issues that the whole Brexit issue engaged are still very much there, and the divisions are still very much there. So it's partly a question to Parliament and also to the government. Do they actually want to move towards a more genuine settlement that actually bridges some of those divides? If they genuinely want to do that, then this kind of mechanism we're talking about today is a good way of getting there. It's not the whole of the answer, but it's a good way of getting there.
Arguably, the vote is the most divisive thing to give people because it's one person or another. But I won't go down that track because I don't believe in it. I don't believe that it is a divisive thing, nor do I believe deliberation is a divisive thing unless it is used as a last minute, let's throw this in as a last gasp effort to try and solve a particular problem because it's incendiary in the community or across the nation. I think that may have been the problem on referenda, when Mr. Cameron decided a referendum might be the way to find a way out of a difficult political position. I don't think deliberative democracy, and I will fight very hard to stop deliberative democracy being used as that panacea. It is democracy in good conditions, not in panic and desperation. So it can be used nonetheless to solve some very difficult issues that, as I say, the political structure often and the media structure prevents us as politicians from sorting out. So, for example, nuclear power in Australia, but also in South Korea, has been very divisive, but actually was used to try to get, and did in South Korea's case, actually was adopted as a new policy by the government ultimately. Issues like abortion, you can't get anything more difficult as a social policy. Time after time, there is now clocking up smart politics as a way of using deliberation to really find out what people think they could do and we should do, and then handing back the gift to people. I think someone said earlier, people's expectations are raised, and if they deliberate, they're going to demand that what they say is implemented. Only if you don't get the groundwork, the terms of reference right. If you say to people, we are going to consider seriously and respectfully your hard work, then people look at this in a very different way. Rather like members of Parliament, if you say we're going to let you do some hard work and then take no notice of you, you'll get a little annoyed. Well, if people say, we may not do everything you want, but it will be a contribution to the debate and we'll pick out the gems as we see them. So somebody has to start that somewhere. And on an issue of democracy that the Commission is looking at, why not start with citizens? That they are meant to own this democracy, let them have their view, and then let it go through the sausage machine. But if you've made a good case, if, as we have offered in this proposal to Her Majesty's government, it is beginning with a national conversation where everybody is involved. We've set the ambition of 10 million founding mothers and fathers of a new settlement on democracy in the UK. If you can engage lots and lots of people and then distill it down into the theme assemblies, maybe 5 thematic assemblies, properly selected, properly briefed, and properly facilitated, where the individuals enjoy the process, and properly fed and watered as well, they can come up with stuff that often in the hothouse of the House of Commons is the very last thing that we're going to do. But give people space and they can help us get to some answers on these very, very tricky questions.
And I think on the particular point of whether it's good only for social issues of the type you referred to, I think it's potentially good for a range of issues that the existing structures are finding it difficult to deal with. So it's not necessarily confined to a particular area. I would like to add also that I would not want to see it used around the debate that could lead to people having rights taken away from them. So I would like to see it used in circumstances where rights could be added to. So I wouldn't want to see the abortion issue reopened for instance, not that this is necessarily on the agenda, but I wouldn't want to see it reopened in a way which could lead to restriction of rights through one of these processes. But I can see that it could potentially be applied in some of those areas and also in other areas as well.
May I just add, Chair, if I may, a brief point. Someone raised the role of the select committees, as well as commissioning, as they have done, some excellent deliberations. In Ireland, and they didn't just cover abortion, they did a lot of other issues too. The Dáil set up a committee that would receive the first package from the various assemblies. So they had a sort of filter. They had a way of looking at this in advance. I would suggest it's not beyond the realms of possibility that the Public Admin and Constitutional Affairs Select Committee may be the perfect vehicle for that, or there could be a specially built thing for a special Select Committee to do that. But I don't see why PACAC couldn't do that job. I don't want to give the chair any more work to do. I've just looked at the agenda, which is enormous. But that interface between the Citizens' Convention and members of Parliament, I think, is really important. We've taken that very seriously. We have a small liaison committee of senior politicians and leaders of parties. We also work very closely with the all-party group on deliberative democracy. This is something that will strengthen members of Parliament and will enable them to find a way to process. Our colleague on our board, Ian Walker in Australia, uses the phrase, give us your hardest problems. The ones where your processes can't work, just run it through a citizens' assembly and see what they can come up with. And they can break log jams that, because of our parliamentary dysfunction sometimes, are seemingly impassable.
Thank you, and thank you for the confidence you're placing in this committee. It's shared between all the members. It doesn't just lie on my shoulders, I can assure that. But on that note, could I bring in Ronnie, please, again? Ronnie.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. For the record, I'm a big fan of citizens' assemblies. I think any vehicle which allows citizens to talk to power has to be welcomed. The key to that is making power listen to what the citizens are actually saying. But I'm confused now. I'm genuinely confused between what we're trying to do with citizens' assemblies and what the Commission's going to be doing. Is it a buffer between? Is it a controlling factor? I'm wondering what the panelists think. What should the relationship be between citizens' assemblies and the Commission? And even beyond that, I know we don't have a remit yet, what should the makeup of the Commission actually be as well?
Andrew, should I have a go at that first?
You go first, Graham, why not?
The relationship of the Citizens' Convention to the Commission set up by government is a wholly subordinate one. It is not taking over the functions of the Commission. It is not demanding that the following things must be done for it to be valid. It is citizens gathered together, looking at some of the difficult issues on an agenda to be decided. We have some ideas about an agenda, but that's to be negotiated. That must lie with government. This is their commission. And discussing those issues, coming up with ideas and recommendations, and then handing them over to the Commission. That is, in effect, the end of the process, which involves the Citizens' Convention. But of course, people will maintain an interest. By that point, we hope that there will have been a national conversation. We would hope that the proceedings of the assemblies, the 5 or 6 themes that are selected for ultimate discussion, let's say who pays for politics, if that happens to be one, that people will follow that through, and they will be, because of that interest and excitement in the country, will hope and be reassured at the beginning of negotiations that they are going to be taken seriously and that their proposals will be treated in a meaningful way. So it is, otherwise, if we weren't to do it that way, Ronnie, it would be subverting the whole process. It would be subverting the right of an incoming party with a big majority to set something up on lines that it wanted, and it would be taking away the role of parliamentarians. So we are the beginning of that sausage machine, if you like, but we hope that the content that we come forward with will be so well put together that we would hope that the Commission would say yes to virtually everything that we would put forward. There may be things taken out at a later point by Parliament or by government. That is your role, that is your right. But also, if you're prepared to set up a citizens element, then it is the right of citizens to discuss things openly, transparently, on TV, and actually come forward with some ideas that they think would be helpful to rebuild or evolve our democracy in the UK.
Dr. Blick.
Thank you, Ronnie. Are you done with that, Ronnie, or is there more?
No, I thought Dr. Blick was going to answer as well, yeah?
Of course.
Andrew?
Yeah, just to really underscore what Graham said there, that the Assembly would feed in to the Commission. The Commission would have to be set up along the lines, ultimately, that the government wanted to set it up. I mean, I'm sure there were lots of views coming in the earlier session, and we could offer views on, the kind of things to be taken into account with regards to composition and with regards to terms of reference. But ultimately, that's a decision for the government. And then the Commission, once set up, would take a contribution from the Assembly, which would then be up to the Commission what to do with it. But in all of those decisions, the question that first the government and then the Commission would have to answer would be, how legitimate do we want to be? And the more inclusive we are, and the more of a considered process we allow to take place, the more likely it is that coming out the other end are going to be proposals which actually command legitimacy and actually command cross-party but also cross-UK support, and actually makes it more likely they're going to work in the long term. So what it really comes down to is how inclusive does the government and then the commission that it sets up want to be, and the extent to which they allow the Assembly, the Convention, to actually influence what it does and actually have a genuine role will go some way towards shaping how inclusive it is and therefore how legitimate outcomes are likely to be. If, on the other hand, they'd rather pursue a more divisive, partisan approach to these issues, that's an option to them. They are in government. That it is possible, but that would have consequences for the outcome. So it's partly a decision for the government now and in future as to what kind of a process it really wants to run. So in the end, the process we're proposing specifically here will not be the final say. It will be an influence, but it could, if it's set up properly and taken into account, be a very important influence.
So the remit for the Commission becomes even more important now, because it's about how it takes information from assemblies. And we're not trying to water down what the people are saying. We've got to make sure we're not putting obstacles in their way, that they have to be a conduit in some way to formulate the argument, then take it forward to government.
Yes, and that has to be the case, because the legislature and the executive will dispose of the recommendations in the parliamentary sense of the word. They will make them real. So that has to be the process by which it happens, rather than, I'm afraid some of the early efforts at deliberation were wish lists. And even Monsieur Macron, who I congratulate on raising the grand débat in France, made the mistake very early on of saying, whatever you come up with, oh, we're definitely going to do that. And of course, things occur that just aren't practical for one reason or another, or because some people are taking advantage of the fact that he said that. So some things weren't done in France. That's not the way to do it. The way we're suggesting it be done is the citizens say what they think. They've organized themselves in ways to come up with good recommendations that are practical, and they give that gift to the legislature and the executive, with the commission obviously as the intermediary. And if that happens, then I think you'll find that there'll be a lot of consensus maintained throughout the process. As Andrew says, what is the point of engaging citizens? Please don't engage the citizens at all if it's just to sort of go through the motions, because that will lead to more distrust and more unhappiness. And I know, Ronnie, if I may, that's something that you've tried to avoid with the government in Scotland creating the Citizens Convention, a Citizens Assembly rather, on the constitutional arrangements in Scotland.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. If I go to Nav, please, now.
Thank you, Chair. The Commission's remit is to restore trust in our institutions and how our democracy operates. How do you think the Commission could achieve this? Dr. Blick?
Well, I think a first point I'd like to make, as a historian, I think we have to be. We've had some discussion today about the idea of a decline in trust in institutions, collapse in trust in institutions. That has been said before many, many times, and you can go back to even before we properly even had democracy. People were saying democracy is on the way out before it had even really been introduced. You can find Oscar Wilde saying it. I mean, so we've got to be slightly careful about making generalizations. So that kind of terminology about restoring trust assumes that there's been a loss in trust. And obviously, again, that wording came out of a particular interpretation, which was saying the trust that's been lost is the trust in those MPs who voted a certain way in certain divisions over a certain issue, which we don't need to go into that today. But I think first you've got to be careful about that and manufacturing a crisis and then using that as a basis for action that, actually is being motivated by other means. So I'd like to insert that. However, I'd agree that it's important to promote and maintain trust in institutions, absolutely. And I think actually this is a good way of doing it. The kind of process we're talking about is showing that we do engage with people in between voting, and that's widely established that we do engage people in between voting and elections. And this is a way in which we can do it. We can put some trust in the people. And also I think it's a two-way thing that actually that it's important to do an expectation management job here. And actually by this kind of process, by taking people through the stages, what are the issues, and actually having proper briefings to them, getting experts, doing evidence sessions, you can actually show them these are the kind of considerations that are at play. It's not a simple issue. There aren't straightforward yes-no answers, as sometimes might be presented in a referendum, and actually show people these are difficult decisions to be made. And so hopefully you can build trust, not just by government and parliament listening to people through this kind of process, but also showing to the people and the people observing the process, the wider audience, that these are complex issues, and therefore, we have part of the trust we have in government is a trust that recognises that government isn't easy and being parliament isn't easy. So I think that's the kind of process I'd like to see. Mutual education really would be a useful part of the task, and also a willingness at the end of it all, because it's been a good process, to seriously take into account the proposals are made and to respond to them in a reasoned way. And if a government or Parliament is not adopting everything that comes out of it, saying why, explaining why. So that's the kind of trust building. So yes, I'm all in favour of building trust, and I think that's the kind of way in which this process could contribute to that.
Thank you, Dr. Blick. I think your point about engaging people between election cycles is very, very important, amongst other things you said. Mr. Allen, would you like to contribute?
If I may, I think going back to that, this should be win-win for everybody. I mentioned the sort of four-legged chair, and that everybody in there has got to sort of support each other as part of building a new democracy. And one of the things about trust, and Andrew put the citizens' position there, if you like, I'd also like to say to members of Parliament, and I found this very, very difficult, if you trust a group of people to go away on behalf of the country and behalf of this process, and they come up with stuff, I can guarantee you that they won't come up with, in this case, Graham Allen's favourite 20 reforms, or even Andrew, your own. They will come up with stuff, having had a serious discussion, compromising, working stuff out, seeing how this bit fits to the other bit. And we, if I may say we as a former colleague, we will also have to trust, providing we're confident in the system, and it's up to us to make clear that you should be, they will have to trust those outcomes and say, we see that this was done seriously. We see that they spent more time than we have on that issue, that they've had greater expertise, they've consulted more widely, they've had a bigger conversation, and they've done it in good faith, and that we trust to a greater extent that they are coming up with something interesting and helpful that we can work into a piece of legislation. So even people who've spent a lifetime writing up the ideal answers on whatever it is, the second chamber or this, that and the other, I've sort of had the revelation of no longer being a policy person, but just being a process person, because getting the process right is what enables those policy decisions to be made. But the downside is they're not always going to be the policy decisions that you personally would want. That's part of having faith and trust in the whole process. And trust begats trust. We have more faith in MPs, we'll have more faith in government, and they will have more faith in people, and it just goes round and round and builds up. And my word, I think that's what we need at the moment in terms of pulling the country together again on some of these issues.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. David Jones, please.
Yes, Graham. The Citizens' Convention proposals rely significantly on the public's engagement with the process.
Yes.
We're talking about clearly constitutional issues, which to many might be regarded as rather dry and not particularly interesting. Why would this process generate more interest in constitutional issues than might otherwise be the case?
David, you're asking the question that was always my favourite question when I began this journey, in a way. But looking around at all the work that's happened and has been done across the planet, people surprise you, and they certainly surprised me in terms of, if you are part of the process where you've put your name forward and you're picked out because you happen to be a person of the right age, gender, geography, and you are one of the people representing the microcosm of the UK, you tend to be someone who has a great sense of civic duty, and you will take your job seriously, rather like on a jury. And even with very complex cases in the legal system on juries, people listen, they ask the right questions, they want to hear the expert witnesses, but they want to be able to make their mind up, and they have that discussion internally in the jury room, let's say. Well, this is done even to a higher standard of probity in order to get your people who will form your themes as theme assemblies as part of this greater citizens' assembly. So those people become very proud of what they've done. They own what they've done, and they will have an interest in making sure that they see it through to the end. Wider than that, though, David, if you see the little graphic that we've done in our proposal to government, which I think should by now have been circulated to all members, you'll see that the Citizens' Convention proper, as it were, sits in this sea of a national conversation, where if we're given enough time, as Andrew says, the more time you give a convention to do its job, the better the outcome. And if we are allowed to engage with media partners, with using the parliamentary channel, with engaging people through, for example, automated mediation, where it's possible now to actually have literally thousands and thousands of people engaged. One of the less frightening aspects of artificial intelligence, where you can get thousands of people engaged on particular nuances of particular questions, then you are engaging people in a wider sense. So it's proven elsewhere, David, and I think there's nothing wrong with the water in the UK that would mean that people in the UK couldn't do this job just as good as they've done in certain states in America, in Australia, in Germany, in Italy, in France, and indeed in China.
You compared the role of the convention to the role of the jury. The jury, of course, is not a self-selecting body. You're summoned to do jury service. In the case of the convention, you actually put your name forward. So isn't there the danger, therefore, that the individuals who put their names forward are people, if you like, who've got an axe to grind about the issue that they're being asked to deliberate on? Is that not a bit of a problem with the process? And before you answered, the other point you made earlier was the need for the convention to be, use the expression, properly selected.
Yeah.
Who does the selecting?
So it is rightly a complicated process, and it's laid out on pages 16 and 17 in the proposal to the government, and still needs further refinement. Government need to be happy with this process, David, as well as ourselves. But to simplify it, and with all the things that arise from oversimplification, if this is taking place, if there's interest in the country, if people are inspired by the debates that are going on, that we will have, that people will do on TV, that people will do online, there'll be people who will say, oh, that sounds quite interesting. Then a seductive invitation arrives, which there are people who make money from doing this sort of stuff, believe it or not, in this field, not selling soap powder, but about deliberation and democracy, engaging people and saying, we can't promise that you will be in the final selection, because there may only be up to, say, 400 or 500 people covering the whole thing, and there are millions of people interested. But would you be interested? Because we are seeking to make this a representative microcosm of the UK. Then people can say yes or no. They think probably they won't get drawn out of the hat, so to speak. But then there's another complicated process which makes sure that every nation and region, age group, gender of the UK is properly represented in that final group. And then there's a number of substitutes should anybody drop out because of births, deaths and marriages. So it is done with the utmost propriety. It is done openly and with integrity by people who are expert in this field. So it's actually much more rigorous, in my opinion, than jury selection. And you will get people who are quite surprised to be drawn out, maybe a little bit taken aback. There's some wonderful video from the Irish example where people arrive on the first day and saying to camera, oh, what on earth am I doing here? I bet they're all professors and, you know, people with master's degrees and stuff. And actually, no, they're people like you. And you get to know people at your table. You get to know about them and their history. And apparently they form strong friendships thereafter, which outlast the actual process. So it is done very, very carefully. If it weren't, we would be wasting our time if that wasn't a process of high integrity. But the final check of reassurance is that none of this will move unless government, who will commission a citizens' convention through the commission, are happy that the standard is the highest possible standard to select the people to help us through some of these very difficult questions.
And just to add it, what is obviously the case that we wouldn't be able to make people to take part, and so it would be people who wanted to take part, but we would be seeking people from a range of groups, including social groups that don't normally take part as much as other social groups, and we'd have a range of measures in place, for instance, childcare support, things like that, for those people who might otherwise not be able to take part. So that would be clearly be an objective, and I suppose any political process involves people who want to take part. So in that sense, it would be no different. You know, I know in Australia, they may have compulsory voting. We don't have things like that here. other than for jury service. So it wouldn't be any different to any of those other processes, only we would be paying special attention to the fact that we wanted a balance of different groups that was representative of society as a whole.
Just to add, that Parliament itself did this process, David, on the social care question with the 2 select committees, and it's also done it to a very high standard, engaged Involve, the organisation that did a superb job on the Climate Change Assembly. So there are standards, very high standards already set, and they must go even higher and not slip.
You mentioned President Macron's faux pas, where he promised to deliver whatever the convention recommended, and then realised that that was really not a particularly wise thing to do. But isn't this the problem? If there were, as there would be, wide public engagement in the process, but the recommendations were not seen to be implemented, might this not act as a discouragement to people or to the public who are already alienated very much from that political process?
If it was done that way, yes, and that would be destructive of the whole move towards deliberative democracy. So it must be done at the outset with complete honesty and say to people, you will produce, we hope your representatives effectively in this microcosm will produce some excellent ideas, but they will be hard won. They will be the result of discussion, of compromise, and as a result of that, with looking over our shoulder, lots of good friends in Parliament, making sure as observers that the process is done in absolutely the best way. But we are telling you now, you haven't got the right to change the law even if you put a recommendation forward. Equally, saying to government and the Commission, you haven't got the right to destroy deliberative democracy by just totally ignoring and steamrolling over something that has been out there on television. Everybody's been trying to get engaged online. Lots of people have been tuning in to see how the convention is working. You have a responsibility to look after that newfound interest in our democracy that we are protecting and blowing gently on that candle so that it can grow and develop. So again, David, it's, as I said earlier to Navendra, that this is something where we hope these are trust-building measures which, bit by bit, they're doing their part, they're being fine with us, they're treating our things seriously, and everybody starts to get better and get more out of this process. It should be, if we're all fair with each other, win-win for the institutions like Parliament and government, but also for the citizens as a whole, who will see that their ideas have been taken seriously